So I've had the Bambu Lab P1S for about 3 weeks now, and in this video I'll be going over my initial impressions and just some of my thoughts on this printer. So I bought this machine myself, it's not been sent over to me, it's not a sponsored video or anything like that, so hopefully I will remain pretty impartial throughout this. I also picked up the AMS system to go with it as well, and I'll briefly touch on that, but I'll save a lot of the nitty gritty stuff for like a full detailed video. So to put things into perspective, I'm mostly a resin 3D printer. I print off a lot of miniatures, a lot of terrain and stuff like that. I also have an FDM printer, which is my Elegoo Neptune 3, so that should hopefully show you the jump from what I've kind of gone from and to. And I guess if you're in that same sort of boat, maybe you're using something like a cheap FDM printer to do some like terrain and other little bits and bats, and you're looking at something maybe a bit different to get closer to your resin 3D printers, maybe this will give you some perspective on that. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with what this is, the P1S is the new upgraded version of the Bambu Lab P1P, which is like their entry-level machine. The P1S has a few upgrades on there, so it's fully enclosed, it's got a carbon filter as well, so it's more capable of printing a larger range of materials. So once I received this, I eagerly ripped into the box and started pulling it all apart. And I've got to say, it's a really easy printer to get up and running. It's all well assembled already. You just need to pop out a few screws that come with it, and then you are pretty much good to go. If you're using the AMS system, you'll also need to get that set up at the same time. But if not, it has a spool holder which goes on the back, which is frustrating, but I understand that's going to be different for different people. You get the bits unscrewed, you pop the little screen thing on there as well, and then you are ready to go. You just load up the Bambu software either on your Mac, your Windows PC, or on something like your phone as well, and then you can start just downloading your prints and sending them across to the printer. So let's talk about the good stuff about this printer first. And going from something like my Neptune 3, I've always kind of enjoyed FDM printing, but the quality's always just been a bit so-so. The Bambu Lab has completely blown me away. It is absolutely incredible, some of the results I've been getting from this. I also picked up a 0.2mm nozzle with this as well, and we'll go into a bit more detail in a moment. So I started off by just testing out a whole host of different things, and to my surprise, one of the big benefits of this machine is literally out of the box and plugged in, it worked with no tinkering. I didn't have to mess around with settings, I didn't have to mess around with any leveling. I just chose the model that I wanted to print and pressed print, and it was good to go. Out of every 3D printer I have ever used, this was by far the easiest off-the-shelf experience, and I've not really played around with any settings, and I've managed to get some fantastic results. So I started off by comparing this to some of the other stuff I've been printing on my Neptune 3, so I printed off all these different terrain pieces, and have some B-roll showing in the background as well, just to show a couple of different comparisons. So these walls, for example, they came off really, really nice and clean compared to something like the Neptune 3, and I tried to keep the settings pretty much as comparable as possible, so the layer height and everything else was exactly the same. The results are night and day, in my opinion. I've always been happy with my Neptune 3, but then using something like the Bambu Lab, I was getting such nice, clean results with this. So all these terrain pieces here that I'm showing at the moment, they were printed at 0.2mm layer height, and I'm really impressed with what it managed to pull off. The other big thing as well is it was about 2 to 3 times faster than my Neptune 3. So these pieces would have once upon a time taken ages to get through the whole set, but on the Bambu Lab, it was just shooting them out like lightning. So moving across from like the direct comparisons there to my older Neptune 3 and those terrain pieces, I also went off and I tried a whole host of different things. My son really wanted a Power Rangers helmet, so I printed off this Green Ranger helmet, a little bit too small unfortunately, so it'd probably choke him if I managed to get it on his head, so that's probably worthwhile avoiding. But again, this print came off in 17 hours and it was printed at 0.2mm layer height, and I was really, really impressed with how well it did and how quickly it did it. Granted, there's going to be some need for some cleanup there as well, you probably can see that in the videos that I'm showing, but this was again before I'd figured out any of the settings, and it's just the off-the-shelf stuff. I then printed off this bolt pistol as well, and I printed it off in 2 halves. And again, the quality was really, really good. Each half took me, I think it was about 3 to 4 hours for each half of this, and it's printed at 0.2mm layer height. And the quality was fantastic straight out. This is one of the first things that I printed, so looking back, I could definitely have done more with ironing and messing around with the settings and slowing things down on the walls, but I was really impressed with what I was seeing straight away. Next up, I started messing around and lowering the layer height, and I printed off this little house here, for example, at 0.12mm layer height, and some of these trees to go with it. At this stage, I'd had some more time with the Bambu Lab, so this is printed about 2 weeks into my journey with it, and the quality is fantastic. This is getting close to my resin 3D printers, but without having all the resin fuss to go with it and being able to print off some of these larger prints. For terrain at this stage, when I'm starting to see these trees come off, and these houses and stuff like that come off, they look really, really smooth. And this was with no cleanup or anything like that. So I've not done any sanding, not used the heat gun on these yet. And once I pop some primer on there and some paint, this is going to be really hard to beat. The next thing is something I've been working on for ages, which is this big T-Rex skeleton for my son. And it's driving me mad. I've been printing this on my Neptune 3, but now I've started printing some bits off on the Bambu Lab. And the big thing that I'm noticing with Bambu Lab is just how precise it is. So these next bits that I'm showing, so we've got like part of the pelvis for the T-Rex and some of the ribs as well. They were pointed at 0.2mm layer height. But the big benefit of something like the Bambu Lab is because it's so accurate and precise, compared to like my Neptune 3, I'm not having to use support on a lot of the stuff. So they will just print straight onto the build plate without a brim, without a support, and it means I have very little cleanup to do afterwards. With these ribs, for example, there's a lot of overhang and stuff like that on there, and they're all in these kind of like tiny bits. They had brims on there just to keep them on the build plate, but I was really, really impressed that they successfully printed with no supports. Next up, let's talk about that 0.2mm hot end. So if you're looking to do some really, really precise detail, I figured this would be something really worthwhile picking up. So I printed off these 3 miniatures. I'll have them all labeled below. But the first ones I did, I printed off with the 0.4mm hot end. So the two comparisons that I did was 0.08mm. So I've got those two there on screen for you to see. One printed off on the 0.2mm hot end and one on the 0.4mm. And then I decided to go really and just like push it and see how good I could get it. And I used a 0.6mm layer height. Now, once I got to this stage, I wasn't really getting the extra detail that I was hoping for. And I definitely need to do some tweaking. And this was all done within like the first couple of days of me owning the machine. So I hadn't played around with it yet. But even with just off the shelf settings, the quality of these is actually really, really good. It's not fantastic, like it's not going to compare to my resin 3D printer, but with some tweaking and some playing around with this, they'd certainly make some adequate stuff to use as like a board game piece, or if you want to give it to some kids and have a little bit more robustness than something like my resin prints. I'm really happy with this. I'm very impressed with what it can do with such a tiny amount of detail. Speaking of that replacement hot end, it's really easy to change out. So literally there's a couple of screws on the hot end, you unclip some bits and then clip the new one back in. All in all, it's about 10 minutes max to get the hot end replaced. If you're switching back and forth between them, it's surprisingly easy to do, even for somebody like me who's not great at fiddling around with things. So, moving across from just like all my basic prints, and let's talk briefly about the AMS system. And I really like this. And basically the AMS allows me to use different colors of filament. So for all these articulating prints, for example, I'm able to print off in just one main color and then have the eyes black, for example, or I can switch things back and forth and around, and it's really easy to do. It's very easy to set up, very easy to get going, and then actually in the software, it's really intuitive and easy to use as well. So I expected to struggle with this, but it's really literally you just click where you want the colors and what filament you want it to use. These articulating prints were all printed at 0.12mm on my 0.4mm hot end, and just mixing and matching between the different colors. The quality looks fantastic. They're really smooth, seamless. I didn't have any brims or anything like that. So if you are looking to produce something like this to sell and you don't want to have to mess around with the cleanup and everything afterwards, it's a really, really good machine for that. There are definitely a few downsides when it comes to the AMS system. First up, it can't handle cardboard spools. Basically, over time, they sort of like get all bitty and it will get caught up in the motor, so you do want to avoid that. The vast majority of filament providers now have different 3D prints that you can print off, which will put like a plastic ring around those cardboard bits. So there is that. I've got one of them on there at the moment, but it's not the best. However, included in the box with the AMS, you also get these 4 different adapters as well. And the idea behind that is you're going to take the cardboard bit off of the spool and stick these on there. I'm probably going to end up destroying a few spools messing around with that, but for now the adapters have worked fine. The other thing to consider as well is it does use up a lot more filament because it does this purge tower behind it. You can mess around with the settings a little bit, but it does use up a lot more filament because this purge tower comes out with your models. Pro tip, if you're printing lots of the same thing, it'll only do one purge tower as it goes through the whole lot. So that way, if you are printing off like loads of these articulating prints, for example, all in the same color set, you could literally just have them all on the build plate, and then it'll only use one purge tower for all of the models it's printing off. So that's a lot of rambling there about all the stuff that I absolutely love about this machine. It's fantastic quality, it's incredibly quick, and I can get some amazing prints off and lots of different colors, which is great fun. But it does have some downsides. I've mentioned a couple of them there with the AMS. It's not perfect, but it's a little bit frustrating. So let's talk about some downsides of the actual machine itself. And the first one is, have you ever put a toddler in a box and sung the theme tune to their favourite song but used the incorrect names. Well, imagine the rage and noise that would come from that cardboard box as it rocks around the room and goes crazy. That's the sound of the P1S as it starts to do some printing. It's by far one of the loudest machines I've ever heard, when it comes to 3D printing at least, especially when it's going through its initial startup process. So you can disable this, you don't need to do the auto bed leveling all the time, but it is loud. It's like really loud. When it first started printing, I thought my machine was broken because, oh my God, the vibrations, the noise, and all the stuff it makes is just like very, very loud. Once it gets past that super, super, super loud stage, it then just gets into normal loudness. And it is a loud machine. You probably wouldn't want to have this in the same room as yourself. At the moment, it's currently in my house just because I've been playing around with it so much and wanting to get used to it. So it's not come out to this space yet, but I can hear it. Whatever room I'm in the house, I can hear it absolutely going crazy. It's probably not a deal breaker for most people because there's always going to be some noise generated by this type of printer, especially since it's going so fast. And you could slow things down. There is a silent mode as well that you can use. So that way, if you did want to have a quieter experience, it does enable that. Just means you're going to get some slower prints. I dread to think what a room full of these would sound like in like a print farm setup. It's pretty loud, I reckon, but I guess if you're in that state, you can have them somewhere else anyway. But it's something to consider if you're looking at having this in a room and it's going to be your everyday printer. It's just something to think about. Next thing is the spool holder on the back, and I know this is a preference thing. If it's in a print farm and you want them all side by side, for example, probably helpful to have it in the back. But I find it really annoying the amount of times I had to turn the machine around to then pop a spool on there. It's alleviated by having the AMS because obviously that's on top of the machine, but again, something to consider. It's going to take up a lot more depth because it has the spool holder on the back and it's already a pretty large machine. Speaking of the size, I wish it was bigger, but again, I wish that about a lot of things. But I do wish that it had a larger print volume. For things like props and helmets, although you can break them up and put them into different parts, that's fantastic. It would be nice to be able to print them off in one big go, especially with how fast this machine is. However, I understand that would probably come with a lot more cost, and this is one of their first machines, so it's not the end of the world, and I kind of look forward to see what they do next, although that might break the bank. And the final thing to talk about is that little screen on the front, although I don't think you can really count it as a screen. It's like a little remote control with a calculator screen in it. It's really just odd. Now, for me, this hasn't bothered me in the slightest, but I understand why people would be frustrated. If you're using like files just on your memory card and you're wanting to interact with the machine directly without using an app on your phone or on your computer, then it could definitely be an issue. It doesn't display that much and it's kind of clunky to get around what you want to. And for the price, I do wish it was better. However, in my experience, I just haven't interacted at all with that click wheel and the little calculator screen, A, because I don't want to because it's so small, but the bigger reason is the fact that their software is so good in terms of how it works on my MacBook and how it works on my iPhone as well. I've not had a reason to interact directly with the machine because everything I need is displayed at a glance. And the final thing is that the camera is just meh. It's okay, it's fun for some time lapses, and you'll most likely have seen a lot of those throughout the video. And it does an adequate job as well if I'm monitoring a print. So if I'm out and about and I just want to quickly check on my prints, I can log in wherever I am and that will connect, and I can look through the camera and see how my print's going. Do I need to pause it? Do I need to do anything like that with it? So it works for its intended purpose. I just wish it was a little bit better quality. If you're looking for some really pro time-lapse stuff from this, it's not going to be fantastic, but it's not the end of the world. So this isn't a full review. I will dive into much more detail later on, but I want to spend a lot more time with this so I can fully understand it and have a real good dig around with it. There's loads of different things that I want to print with as well, so I want to try all the different types of filament, like all the ABS and stuff like that, and see how well that turns out and how strong those are as well. So let me know in the comments, is there anything you want me to dive into when it comes to printing with this, especially again from a miniature wargaming perspective? If you're looking for stuff like D&D props and terrain pieces, is there anything you want me to try out with this and see how it works, and anything you've been curious about? But my early impressions are that this is one of my favorite printers that I have just out of the whole lot, even including my resin printers. Off the shelf, it was so easy to use. I really enjoy using the software. It's very easy just to get the prints that I want from it. It's fast, it's efficient, and it gives me really, really good quality stuff. Is it going to be for everybody? Absolutely not. It comes with a pretty high price tag as well. But if you are somebody who's looking to print to sell, for example, it's a pretty good starting point, because although you're spending more money than something like one of the budget printers, there's far less for you to do and tinker with and get up and running, and the results that you get pretty much off the bat are just fantastic. All in all, I've had an absolute blast with this so far. I'm really, really impressed with it, and it's making me want to print so much more stuff, which is probably bad because I'm going to run out of money because I'll buy too much filament or something like that. But all the terrain bits and all of that is just, I'm really, really impressed with this. Now that's from somebody who's been 3D printing for the past couple of years. Out of every printer that I've used, it has absolutely blown me away for ease of use and just for the quality for the time that you need to invest into it. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and if you've got any questions that you want me to delve into or anything you want me to play around with when it comes to the full review, then just let me know in the comments. So thanks for watching, hit that like and subscribe button, leave a cheeky comment down below as well, which really helps the channel to grow, and I hope I will see you in the next one. Bye.